Swiftmeisters and Data Divas, I'm Professor Gallagher, and in this lesson we will continue to work with the ultra-fabulous SwiftData extensions to SwiftUI. Specifically, we'll cover how we can use a picker view to interactively make changes to values created using a query property wrapper so that we can reload data that's sorted, ordered, or filtered. So let's sort out these techniques for some more big learning. Now, if you're arriving at this lesson, you may want to go through an earlier lesson where we updated the to-do list app that we created in my SwiftUI course. You can find that on my YouTube channel, and I'll link that in the description as well. While I'll assume you've gone through the earlier lessons, if you haven't, you can download a project so that you can join at the point where everyone is completed. Clone the project from this URL. This will also be linked in the description. And before we start, I also want to give a shout out to some other folks in the SwiftUI community who helped answer some of my initial questions. Flow Writes Code and Stuart Lynch. They both have Swifty YouTube channels, and I highly recommend both for additional big learning. Their sauce is always awesome. Keep dropping knowledge, you exceptional Swifters. And also, Stack Overflow user Pixel Shaper offered some additional insights that I found helpful. Big thanks to him as well. Now let's begin cooking in the to-do view. This is the first view loaded by the app, and it shows the results of what's saved in SwiftData. And the first thing we'll do is create an enum with options that will display in the picker view. Now, if I was working on a more complex app with the team, I'd likely break this out as a separate file so it's easier to find. But for this lesson, I'm going to start by keeping everything in the to-do list view. I'm going to write this just above the struct. In this learning example, I think it'll be easier to scroll up and down to reference the code. So I'm going to write enum, I'll call this sort option, upper camel case, colon, conform to string so that I can add raw values, and case iterable so that I can loop through all of the values using a for each. I'll set my cases as case as entered equals the string as entered, case alphabetical equals a string A-Z, case chronological equals the string date, and case completed equals the string not done. Now our picker view is going to need a state variable to hold its selection, so in the to-do list view, I'll add @state private var, call this sort selection lower camel case colon, this is of type sort option, the enum we just created, and I'll initially set this equal to dot as entered, meaning we'll show the data as it was entered, unsorted, and not filtered. Now to set up a segmented picker at the bottom toolbar, I'll add a new toolbar item between my toolbar modifier curlies. I'll select the toolbar item with placement and content and press return. My placement will be bottom bar, and I'll tab and press return for trailing closure, and in here I'll add a picker value, selecting the option with title, selection, and content. The title key doesn't show up in the segmented control in iOS, so I'll just pass an empty string in here. My selector is binding, so that's going to be $sort selection, the state variable we just created, tab and return, and for our content, we're going to use a for each to show all the options in our enum, so we're going to select the for each option with data ID and content. The data we're iterating through is sort option, upper camel case, that's the enum that we created above, and to show all cases, we'll say .all cases. Tab over to ID, that's \self, tab over to content, press return, and I'll call the option that we're showing sort order, lower camel case. Inside, we'll simply add a text view passing in sort order .raw value. That's going to show the string associated with that case. The default picker isn't what we want, so after the closing curly for the picker view, we'll add .picker style passing in .segmented. Now our first step is going to be to break out our query and the views the query displays. This will be our list and for each statements here into their own separate view. So we'll need to include the query value and the model context in that new view, since our access to SwiftData now happens in this new view, and by breaking this out into a separate view, when we call the view, we're going to be able to set up a new query and pass in the sort selection so that we can initialize our query and set that up so that it shows either as entered, sorted alphabetically, by data, or filtering out just the values that are not done. So let's set this up. So I'm going to bring the list style over to my new view, so I'm just going to cut this out and paste it at the top of my list modifier so that I can cut these out together. But first, let's create the view that's going to hold this list content. So between my to-do list view and my enum, again, I'm putting these all in the same file, I'll create the new view. It's always a struct, and I'll call this, how about sorted to-do list, upper camel case, colon, and as I start to type the word view, code completion offers to fill out the standard view, so I'll press return. Looking good. Now I don't want hello world in here, so I'll delete that, and instead I'm going to go back to my to-do list view. I'm going to highlight the entire list along with the first list style modifier, cut that out. Now instead I want to call my new view from this spot, so I'm going to enter sorted to-do list, and back in the body of sorted to-do list, I'm going to paste in the content I just cut out. Now, the query property that is the variable ToDo's that reads in our list of ToDo's from SwiftData is going to be in our new view. And to use the query property, our data also needs to refer to the model context. So I'm going to highlight and cut out these two lines and paste them into our new sorted ToDo list view just below the body property. Next, I want to pass the sort that we select from our picker view. Remember, we have that in our sort selection state value, and I want to pass that into the sorted ToDo list view that we just created. So up in that view, I'm going to add a property, and I'll set this up as let sort selection : sort option. That's our enum type. And it's an uninitialized constant. It can be a constant since this value won't change, and it's uninitialized so that this view is always going to want us to pass this value in so that it can create the view. Now, it's absolutely possible to add attributes to our query declaration, and you can see this in Apple's SwiftData documentation. There are initializers that accept a sort order. You can filter on a predicate, so passing in a closure. And to give you some examples of how we'd set this up, and these query lines are all single line statements. They might look like they're on multiple lines just so you can view them side by side, but a SwiftData query created with no additional parameters will show data in the order in which it was entered. You can add a sort property to query, passing in \property name for the model property that you want to sort on. Here we're sorting on the ToDo items in alphabetical order. In this example, the item is the name of the ToDo that you see here: D&D, Learn Swift, Wine Tasting. Now, if you want to change the sort order, you can add an order parameter. .reversed will show things in reversed alphabetical order, and you can filter by passing in # predicate, and that takes a closure that you want to filter on, just like you'd set up a closure in conventional Swift. So here, this closure will only show ToDo elements where the isCompleted property is equal to false. Now here's the tricky part. If you option click on the ToDo's variable, you'll see that it's a get-only property. That means that we can't set it equal to anything after it's been created. Try to do something like this where we update ToDo's with new query values, and it's not allowed. So this leaves me wondering, with a professorial beard stroke, how do we interactively add or remove attributes to create a query if it's get only? Or put another way, how can I query data based on the picker selection that I send to the view? Well, one thing that we can do is we can add an initializer to the view, and this can include a different query initialization based on the sort order that we pass into the view. Now, we won't be able to update the query options after they're created, but since sort order is a state value, whenever we tap on a new value in the picker view, the old sorted ToDo list is destroyed and the new one is recreated, reinitializing the view based on the sort order that we pass in. Now, here's how we do this in code. So this here is the initializer that we're going to add to our sorted ToDo list view. Now it runs when this view is created or recreated, and this will happen anytime the sort selection is updated when we click on the picker view, since the sort selection is a state value. It's a state here, not here, but this view will be redrawn since this state value here is in the call to set up our sorted ToDo list in our navigation stack. Now what's going on with the initializer? Well, query is a property wrapper, and without getting too far under the hood, this underscore in front of the same name we use for our variable in our property wrapper will let us initialize our query in our init function. And we're selecting the appropriate query setup in this switch case statement here based on the sort selection that we pass into the view. Now, if you're curious, the underscore ToDo's actually refers to a value synthesized by the property wrapper feature. And if you want to dive deeper into more advanced Swift, there's a discussion of property wrappers and how they work in the section of the Swift language guide at swift.org, but frankly, at this stage in our course, going into how this works probably isn't necessary. Just know that you can use the underscore value to initialize our property wrappers as part of the view's init function, but unfortunately, this can't be changed once it's been set up. But that's not a problem for us, since we can reinitialize this view each time a picker value is tapped and the sorted ToDo list value is recreated. And depending on the value that we pass in, we'll choose whichever query initialization is appropriate for the selected sort option. Very cool, very reproducible in other projects, so let's code this up. So we'll create the view's initializer just like we do an initializer for, say, a class. This initializer for the view is called when the view was first created, and we'll use the keyword init, and between parens we'll pass in our value sort selection : which is of type sort option. And in between the curlies, we'll set the sort selection constant defined up here, which is self, referring to the current view, dot sort selection equal to the sort selection value that we pass in. Then below this, we'll enter our switch case statement with switch self.sort selection, but we can see as I'm starting to type sort selection, code completion recognizes what I'm doing. It offers to fill out my switch case statement, so I'm going to press return, and here are all of the cases, and since the enum sort option is exhaustive, no need for a default case. So for the as entered case, we want to create a query and read the data with no ordering, just as the data was entered. So I'm going to first type this wrong. I'll say ToDo's equals query open and close parens. And now I get that error that I warned you about. ToDo's is a get-only property. But we can actually initialize this by referring to the synthesized value underscore ToDo's. The error goes away, and this is gonna work. Now for the alphabetical case, we'll say underscore ToDo's equals query, and I'll choose the option with sort and animation. Now sort wants a key path. The way we write this out is simply backslash. If I had multiple models, I could enter the model name here, but I only have one model, so I can just say dot for the properties of that model, and I'm gonna select dot item. I'll also tab over for animation, and sometimes animations do something. Actually, in the case of the query, at least at this time, I'm not seeing any animations on initialization, but you can enter dot to see the different animations to work with. I'm going to select default, but again, we're not going to see anything. But feel free to try out these animations in different contexts. It should work under some circumstances. Now for the chronological case, underscore ToDo's equal query, select the option with sort, and this time we'll pass in backslash dot due date. And for completed, I'm going to show you how we can filter out a subset of results. Now the syntax for this is a bit more opaque. We need to say underscore ToDo's equals query, and if I start to type in the word filter, I can see code completion highlights this parameter. So I'll press enter, and the filter wants something called a predicate. Now predicate is actually a Swift macro. We discussed Swift macros in our previous video. Swift is going to write code for us behind the scenes, and when you use a macro that's not attached to a declaration, before we were using a macro as @ model, here we're going to put a number sign before the macro's name. So we just enter number sign or pound sign, capital P predicate, and then we pass in here for this macro to do its thing is just a closure. And this is going to be just like a closure that we would use in a Swift filter higher order function. So we'll just say between curlies, $0, which says go through all the elements that we're querying one by one, dot is completed, look for the is completed property in each element, double equal sign to check to see if the element's property equals false. That'll filter the value in. So only values with is completed equals false will show. Those are the items with an unchecked box to the left. And that's all we need to do to set up the initialization to get our interactive query selection working. But we still need to go down here and update our call to sorted to-do list. The view now wants a sort selection to be passed in. So we'll enter the sort selection, which is just sort selection, which we set up using the picker view. And at this point, our code should work if we build and run. But since I want to be able to look at the date that I'm sorting on as well, I want to go and modify my for each statement. So I want each element to show two lines, one on top of the other. The first one shows what we have there already, the item name, and below that I want to show the date. So I'm going to collapse this HStack here, and I'm going to right click on HStack, and I'm going to embed this in a VStack. I can see for some reason my Swift indentation is off, so I'm going to Command A to select all, Control I to fix indentation. And then let's see. So after setting the font for my HStack, I want to add a new HStack. I'll collapse my HStack so it's easier to see where the bottom is. And just after the font modifier here, I'm going to add a new HStack. And in between the curlies, I'll add a text view passing in ToDo.DueDate. But this is a date, and I want to format it as a string to show it in a text view. So I'm going to say dot formatted and select the date and time options. And for the date, I'll use dot abbreviated, and for the time, I'll use dot shortened. And I'm also going to want both of these HStacks to be left aligned. So just after VStack, I'm going to put in parentheses and add an alignment parameter, passing in dot leading. And I'm going to add a dot format style to the text in my second HStack. I'm going to say that this is dot secondary. On an iOS device, that should gray out this text view just a little bit. I think that looks nice. And my to-do model also has a reminder property that's a bool value. So if the reminder is set, I want to show a calendar clock icon. So inside the second HStack, I'm going to say if, in parens, to-do.reminder is on, remember that's a bool, true or false, and after curly braces after this, if it's true, I want to show an image with a system name, and the system name is going to be the string calendar.badge.clock. Make sure it's spelled just like this, and below this, I'm also going to change the dot symbol rendering mode to dot multicolor. That'll just show the little calendar in standard colors. And let's see, my swipe actions are also in the wrong place. I want this to apply to everything that's in an element of the for each, so that should be in the VStack with both of the HStack stacks inside. So I'm going to highlight and cut out the swipe actions, collapse my V stack, and I'll paste it just below the V stack. So now if I swipe left on any of the elements in the V stack, it should prompt me to delete the to-do item, unfold, and now I should be able to build and run. Hammer time! No errors, and we see the app is up and running. I've got data in here from an earlier app. If you don't have data, feel free to take some time to enter data right now. So the default is these values are shown as entered. Let's click on A to Z, and look at that. Sweet sassy SQL databases. We've got our elements sorted alphabetically. For me, that's exercise through update. Now let's click on date, and oh, look at that. Now we're sorted by date and time. Looking good. Now, if we look at this, we've got 2 elements that are checked as completed, so let's click on Not Done, and we see only those that don't have the check mark that are not completed are filtered in. Nice! So you can click on any of these options down here, and remember, each time you click on this, we're updating the state variable sort selected, which triggers a recreation of our view. That's the sorted to-do list. So we have some interactivity in terms of the query values we are showing using SwiftData. Nice! And as I pointed out in here, this animation default really isn't doing anything, but why don't we get rid of this? And I want to show you that you also have an option to pass in an order value to your query. So instead of A to Z, let's order this in reverse alphabetical order, Z to A. So I'll delete the animation, I'm going to enter order, colon, and if I press a dot in here, I can do forward or reversed. Let's select reverse. This should do reverse alphabetical order. So just to keep our UI consistent, I'll Command F to search for A-Z and change that to Z-A. Build and run, hammer time, looking good. Click on Z to A, and we see now that we're ordered in reverse alphabetical order. Nice! So you can click through the different sort and filter options. If you enter another to-do, everything should continue to work fine. And once again, with this beta of the simulator, I'm noticing that the keyboard doesn't pop up. But if I go under the I/O menu and then turn off the hardware keyboard and then turn it back on, I should be able to type on my Mac keyboard and have it show up in the simulator. I'll remind myself to get my presentations ready for Apple. Apple kindly named me a distinguished educator for higher ed, and I've got a few presentations to make for Apple and other educators next month. But you should see everything in your app working fine. If I toggle the Apple presentation to completed, then click on Not Done, I can see that that's filtered out. I'll head back to Xcode and undo the alphabetical order so that it's A to Z, and I'll also get rid of my reversed order option. If I close and run again, my data is just as I entered it previously. SwiftData is working great. If I remove the reminder from my Apple presentation, I can see that the icon no longer shows in my list view. That's just how we coded the app, so this works perfectly. Hopefully, you found learning to get interactivity from your queries to be useful. We also learned to use the underscore and the property name to initialize a property wrapper. If you like this, please take a fraction of a second to like the video. A subscribe helps even more, and comments posted also help surface the video in YouTube's algorithm. I really appreciate you spending time with me. Now continue to hack.